My name is Audrey Nichols, and I was 34 the night my phone lit up at 11 minutes past 10. The screen said, Lily, emergency only. She was 8 years old. I answered on the first ring, and under the static and the rain I heard a small voice, almost a whisper. I'm alone, Auntie. I'm so hungry. Please come. My niece was supposed to be safe. She lived 2 hours away, at my parents' house in Hartsboro, where they had spent a year telling me she was thriving. I was already reaching for my keys. What I found when I walked into that kitchen made my blood boil. But here's what none of them knew. I count money for a living, and every dollar a person spends leaves a trail. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family choices, and quiet courage outlasts cruelty. If stories about standing up for the ones who can't stand up for themselves are why you're here, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I drove the whole 2 hours with the wipers on high and my hands at 10 and 2. People who know me will tell you I don't panic. I left home at 18 with 2 suitcases and a scholarship I'd half earned, half begged for, and I built a small forensic accounting practice the slow way, one client at a time. You learn a certain stillness doing that work. You learn that screaming never finds the missing money. Patience does. So I didn't scream. I just drove. But somewhere past the county line, I let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding for months. How did a child end up calling her aunt on a cracked pink flip phone at 10 at night? I'd given Lily that phone myself. A cheap prepaid thing. The Christmas after her mother died. My mother had laughed at it. She's got us, Carol said. What does she need a phone for? I'd insisted anyway. Old habit. I'm the one in the family who plans for the thing nobody thinks will happen. For a year, I'd asked to visit and been told the same thing in the same warm voice. Lily was settling in. Lily needed routine. Too many faces would unsettle her. I'd offered to take her for a summer, and my father told me a child needs one home, not a revolving door. I believed them because believing them was easier, and because they were her grandparents, and because the alternative kept me up at night. The rain came harder near Hartsboro. I told myself I was overreacting. I have rarely been more wrong, and rarely more right, in the same hour. The porch light was off. That was the first thing. My parents had lived in that house 30 years, and the porch light was never off, because Carol said a dark porch looked poor. I knocked, then tried the door, and it opened. Inside, the house was cold in the way a house gets when nobody's paying for heat they don't have to. Lily was sitting on the bottom stair in a thin t-shirt and socks, the flip phone clutched in both hands like it might fly away. She looked at me and didn't cry. That was the part that undid me. An 8-year-old who has learned not to cry has learned something no 8-year-old should know. They went to the casino, she said. Grandma said they'd be back late. I asked when she'd eaten. She thought about it, which was its own answer. I went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, and the light barely came on, and the inside hummed over almost nothing. A carton of milk 3 days past its date, a bottle of ketchup, the heel of a loaf of bread in a twist-tied bag. I checked the freezer, the pantry. The pantry was padlocked. A child's pantry, padlocked, in a house with a brand new flat screen glowing in the next room. I made Lily scrambled eggs from the only 2 eggs in the door, and while they cooked, she pulled a sandwich bag of crushed saltines out of her backpack and set it on the counter, careful, like a person rationing supplies. In case, she said, and didn't finish. Then headlights swung across the kitchen wall and a car door slammed, and I heard my mother laughing on the front walk. Carol came in first, still laughing at something, a department store bag on her arm. She saw me, and the laugh stopped like a record lifted off a needle. Audrey, what on earth? Not a question. My father followed. Roy, broader and slower, smelling of cigarette smoke and the casino floor. He didn't say hello. He looked at the eggs on Lily's plate and then at me, and something in his jaw set. I kept my voice level. I asked why the pantry was locked, and why there was no food, and why an 8-year-old was home alone at 10 at night. Carol's whole face rearranged itself into wounded patience. She's not a baby, Audrey. She knows to call if there's a fire. I asked again about the food. And my mother said the thing I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life, said it lightly, like it settled everything. She's fed. She's housed. What more does a child need? I looked at the new television. I looked at Lily, who had gone very still over her plate. Roy stepped between me and the stairs, not touching me, just placing his body in the path. You left this family, he said. You don't get a vote. I understood, standing in that cold kitchen, that they had rehearsed this. Not these exact words, but the posture of it. The certainty that I was the intruder and they were the wronged ones. I have audited people who embezzled for a decade while smiling at the company picnic, and I know the difference between guilt and grievance. They didn't feel guilty, they felt interrupted. I picked up my coat. I was not leaving Lily. Not really. I was leaving to do the only thing that has ever worked for me. On my way out, I saw it, propped against the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter where the fruit should have been, a glossy cruise brochure, the kind with a couple in white silhouetted against a sunset, edges crisp, nothing about it old. 7 nights, Caribbean, balcony stateroom. Beside it, a department store receipt and the new television's manual, still in its plastic. I didn't pick anything up. I just looked. The way you look at a balance sheet when one line doesn't fit the others. Here was a household that could not keep 2 eggs and a coat that fit an 8-year-old, and here was a 7-night cruise with a balcony. I have spent my career on exactly that distance, the gap between what a person says they can afford and what they actually spend. The gap always means something. Carol caught me looking. We work hard, she said, sharp now. We're allowed nice things. Nobody had said they weren't. I said goodnight to Lily and crouched down and told her, quietly, that I would call her tomorrow on her phone, and that she should keep it charged and keep it close. She nodded. Her grandmother watched us with her arms folded. In the car, I sat for a full minute before I turned the key, and I did the thing I do when a number won't leave me alone. I wrote it down. Cruise, balcony, 7 nights, new television, padlocked pantry, empty refrigerator, a child who rations crackers. I didn't know yet where the money was coming from, but I knew it was coming from somewhere, and I knew children don't generate income, and I knew exactly who in that house thought I'd never check. Everything in me wanted to carry Lily out to the car right then. I want to be honest about that, because I think a lot of people would have, and I don't blame them. But I knew what would happen if I did. They were her legal guardians. I was an aunt with no standing and a head start of about 40 minutes. Taking her would have been called abduction in any courtroom in this state, and it would have handed them the one thing they didn't yet have, a reason to paint me as the unstable one. The system that was failing Lily was the same system I'd need to save her, and you don't beat a system by breaking it. You beat it by knowing it better than the people hiding inside it. So I drove the 2 hours back to Belhaven with my jaw aching from clenching it, and somewhere around the halfway mark the accountant in me took over from the sister and the aunt. I stopped feeling and started listing. What did I actually know? A child's mother had died. A child was being neglected. Not beaten. Neglected. Which is quieter and harder to prove, and just as real. And there was money in that house that didn't belong there. I don't raise my voice. I build a record. By the time I pulled into my own driveway at almost 2 in the morning, I wasn't furious anymore. Fury burns out. I was something colder and more useful. I opened my laptop, made coffee I didn't need, and started doing the only kind of digging I'm any good at, the kind that doesn't leave fingerprints because it only ever touches the truth. Here's what I pieced together over the next 2 days, between client files and too little sleep. When Lily's mother, Ruth, died in the accident 2 years ago, Lily became eligible for Social Security survivor benefits. A child who loses a working parent gets a monthly check until adulthood. It isn't charity. It's money Ruth paid into her whole life, set aside for exactly this. Someone has to receive it on the child's behalf, a representative payee, and that someone is legally bound to spend it on the child. Food, clothing, shelter, medical care. Whatever's left over is supposed to be saved for the child in the child's name. I already knew who the payee was before I confirmed it. My mother had filed the paperwork within a month of the funeral. On top of the survivor benefits, there was a state kinship care stipend, a smaller monthly amount paid to relatives raising a child so that child doesn't end up in foster care. 2 streams of money, both with one purpose, both flowing into a house with a padlocked pantry. And here is the detail that turned my stomach and sharpened my focus at the same time. A representative payee who is the child's own parent is exempt from filing the annual accounting. A grandparent is not. Carol was required, every single year, to report to the government exactly how she'd spent that money. I wondered, sitting there at 2 in the morning, whether she ever had. I wondered what a year of that accounting would show if anyone ever made her produce it. I am very good at making people produce things. The question was no longer whether money was missing. The question was how much, and how I'd prove it without ever raising my voice. I tried the kind way first. I want that on the record too, because the people who love control will always tell the story as if you came at them with knives. I called my mother on a Sunday afternoon and kept my voice easy. I said I'd love to take Lily for a while, give them a break, get her caught up on her checkups. I even offered to send money for groceries every month. No strings, just to help. Carol's voice cooled by 10 degrees in 3 seconds. We don't need your money, Audrey. I said it wasn't about need, it was about Lily. Lily's fine. You saw her for one bad night and decided you knew better than the people raising her. Then my Aunt Sharon got on the line, because of course she was there, Carol's younger sister, the chorus to every performance my mother has ever given. Honey, she's a dramatic little thing, Sharon said. She called you because it was storming and she wanted attention. You're reading into it. I asked Sharon gently when she'd last seen the inside of that refrigerator. There was a pause. Then Carol again, flat and final. If you keep this up, we'll move. New school, new town, and you won't know where. It wasn't an offhand threat. It was a strategy, spoken out loud, and she heard herself say it and didn't take it back. I told her I'd think about everything she'd said, and I hung up, and I sat very still. They thought the threat would scare me into silence. What it did was tell me they knew they were vulnerable. People who are certain they've done nothing wrong don't threaten to disappear. The next morning, I made a single, polite, formal request, in writing, the way I'd request records from any subject of an audit. As Lily's aunt and closest blood relative besides her grandparents, I asked to see the annual accounting for the survivor benefits, the report any payee is supposed to keep and file. I framed it as concern, not accusation. I copied no lawyers, named no agencies, made no threats. I just asked the paper to talk. The reply came from my father, and it told me more than any document could have. He didn't say, of course, and he didn't say, here it is. He said it was none of my business, that the government had no problem with how they did things, and that if I contacted anyone official, he would make sure I never saw Lily again. I read that email 4 times. I couldn't pull a federal file from my kitchen table, and I won't pretend otherwise. Those records aren't a thing a worried aunt just looks up. But I knew the rules. A grandparent payee owes that accounting every single year, and failing to file it is, in the language of the agency that watches these things, an indicator of possible misuse. I also knew the sound of a clean payee, and this wasn't it. A clean payee hands you the receipts and says good riddance. They don't threaten to hide the child. So I didn't have proof yet. I had a refusal that behaved exactly like a confession, a rule they were almost certainly breaking, and a clear idea of who could pry the rest loose once a court was involved. In my line of work, we have a quiet phrase for the moment a subject stops cooperating and starts threatening. We call it consciousness of guilt. I had just watched my own father demonstrate it in writing with his name on it. I built the rest of it the way I build any case, brick by lawful brick, never once doing the thing the movies love, the secret recording, the hidden camera. I don't need theater. I need documents, because documents don't get nervous on the stand, and they don't change their story. I requested Lily's school records as the family member I am, and they told their own quiet tale. 11 absences in 1 semester. a standing spot on the free lunch list, which I was glad existed and sick that it was her only reliable meal. A note from a teacher about a child who asked to take leftover snacks home. I found the gap in her medical care. 2 years without the checkups an 8-year-old should have, no dentist, an expired prescription nobody had refilled. None of it was a bruise. All of it was a pattern, and patterns are what I do. I started a timeline, a real one, dates down the left side, the way I'd build it for a jury. Money in, money out. A child's needs unmet alongside a grown couple's wants met in full. I called the family law side of a firm I'd done forensic work for and asked, hypothetically, what it would take. The answer was sobering and exactly what I expected. Courts move slowly. Courts favor stability. Courts do not snatch children from grandparents on the word of an aunt who lives 2 hours away, no matter how empty the refrigerator. I would need it airtight. So I made it airtight. And every few nights I called a cracked pink flip phone, and a small voice answered, and I kept my tone light and my questions gentle, because the last thing that child needed was to feel like evidence. Those phone calls became the spine of the whole thing, though I didn't plan them that way. Lily would answer on the first ring, always, like she'd been holding the phone, and we'd talk about nothing for a few minutes so it wouldn't feel like an interview. Her drawings, a library book she'd hidden under her mattress so it wouldn't get taken. Then, in the offhand way kids tell you the worst things, the details would come. The pantry was locked because Grandma says I snack too much. She didn't have a winter coat that fit. She wore last year's, sleeves at the elbow. Some nights they went out and she stayed home with the lights off, so the electric bill doesn't go up. One night, scrolling through her phone with me on the line to find a photo she wanted to show me, she went quiet. "Auntie," she said, "there's a number in here that says Daddy." I asked her to read it to me. She did. Slow. 1 digit at a time. I wrote it down and stared at it. My brother Daniel had been gone for 1.5 years, and the family line was that he'd fallen apart after Ruth died and abandoned his daughter and run off. I'd half believed it, the way you half believe the worst about people when you're tired and far away. But here was his number, alive in his daughter's phone, saved by a man who plans to come back. "Have you ever called it?" I asked. "Grandma took it out of my contacts," Lily said. "I put it back in the notes part so they wouldn't see." 8 years old and already smarter about preserving the truth than the adults charged with raising her. I made a note that night, the kind I never lose, to preserve that little phone and everything in it before anyone thought to wipe it. I told her I loved her. Then I hung up and called the number. It rang 6 times. A man answered who sounded older than my little brother and exactly like him. "Hello?" I said his name. There was a silence so long I thought the call had dropped, and then Daniel said, in a voice that broke on the word, "Audrey? Is Lily okay?" And the whole story I'd been told came apart in my hands. Daniel hadn't run off. After Ruth died, he'd gone under in a way that frightened him, and he'd checked himself into a treatment program 3 states away, and then taken a long-haul contract on a fishing crew out of Alaska to dry out and earn and put himself back together. He'd left Lily with our parents because they'd begged for her, sworn they'd care for her, told him it was the best thing for everyone while he got well. He'd been sending money home for her every month. He'd called and called. "They told me she was thriving," he said. "They told me you were helping out, that you'd taken over a lot of it, and that I shouldn't confuse her by calling too much." I felt the floor tilt. Because they'd told me the mirror image. They'd told me Daniel abandoned her and I should stay out of it for the child's sake. They had stood between a father and a sister and a little girl, and fed each of us a different lie, and pocketed the checks from both directions. "Why didn't you just come home?" I asked, not as an accusation, as a brother question. "I tried calling the house in October," he said. "The number wouldn't connect. I figured they'd changed it." They hadn't changed it. They'd blocked him. I told Daniel to sit down, and I told him everything I'd found, and I heard a grown man start to cry 2,000 miles away. The next Saturday I drove back to Hartsboro, because I needed to see the performance with my own eyes before I tried to dismantle it. There was a church potluck. the kind of small-town gathering where reputations are built and maintained over casserole dishes. I parked across the lot and watched my mother hold court. Carol had Lily in a clean dress I'd never seen, hair brushed, and she paraded her like a trophy, accepting the soft murmurs of the other women. Such a blessing. You two are saints, taking her in. Not everyone would. Carol pressed a hand to her chest and said she only did what any grandmother would, and Roy stood by looking gruffly noble, and Sharon refilled the lemonade and nodded along. I'd brought a small bag of groceries and a coat in Lily's size, and when I walked up the temperature of the whole circle dropped. Audrey, my mother said, bright as glass, we weren't expecting you. A cousin I hadn't seen in years touched my arm and said, low, like she was doing me a kindness. After everything they've sacrificed, you really want to take the child too? There it was, the story they'd seeded in the soil all around them. The devoted grandparents and the jealous, childless aunt who wanted to wreck a happy home. I didn't argue. You can't outtalk a story that's been watered for a year. I just knelt down, helped Lily into the coat, and watched her face when the sleeves came down past her wrists. She looked at me like I'd performed a miracle, a coat that fit. That's what passed for a miracle in her life. I stood up, said a polite goodbye to the circle, and decided I was done being polite. Over the following week, I built the thing that changed everything, and I want to describe it plainly, because it's what I'd ask you to hold in your mind for the rest of this story. I couldn't subpoena a bank from my kitchen. That would come later, through lawyers and a court order. What I could do was reconstruct the shape of it from the pieces already in reach. I knew the benefit amounts. I knew survivor checks land on a fixed schedule, the third of the month, steady as a heartbeat, with the kinship stipend close behind. I had what Daniel could legally hand me, his own records of the money he'd wired into that household. And I had what anyone with eyes could see in that house, the new television, the patio set, and the dated cruise brochure I'd watched lean against an empty fruit bowl. I laid it out the only way I know how, a clean working ledger, dates down the side. Money owed to a child, on one side. On the other, a comfortable life nobody had earned, with a 7-night balcony cruise booked within days of a benefit landing. And in the space where Lily's expenses belonged, the groceries and the winter coat and the dentist, there was a silence you could hear. I couldn't prove the casino withdrawals yet, or the salon charges, or the catalog orders, but I knew they were there, the way you know a wall is hollow before you ever knock on it. I wasn't angry anymore. I had something better than anger. I had the skeleton of a case, and I knew exactly which court order would put the flesh on it. I took everything to a family law attorney named Patricia Hale, a woman about my mother's age with reading glasses on a chain and absolutely no patience for cruelty dressed up as duty. She read the ledger without a word, slid it back across the desk, and said, "Well, you build a tidy case, don't you?" I told her it's the only thing I'm good at. She walked me through the path, and she was careful, the way good lawyers are, never promising what a judge would do. We would file a petition for emergency custody, arguing that Lily's welfare was at risk. We would request, formally and through the court, the full guardianship and payee accounting that nobody had ever produced voluntarily, and the financial picture I'd built would not, by itself, take Lily out of that house. That wasn't how it worked. But paired with the school records, the medical gaps, and a welfare check, it could move a court to act, and it could trigger a separate review of how the benefits had been handled. Misuse of a child's survivor benefits is its own serious matter, Patricia said. The agency can require full repayment. It can refer the case further. That's not our courtroom, but it's a door that opens once the numbers are on the table. She looked at me over the glasses. You understand, I can't tell you they'll go to prison. I told her I didn't want them in prison. I wanted Lily at a table with food on it, and a father who was allowed to call her. Then let's get the documents in front of a judge, she said, and let the documents do the talking. That was the whole strategy. Not a single raised voice, just the truth, filed in triplicate, on time. They felt it coming the way animals feel weather. The day after Patricia's office sent the first formal letter, the phone calls to Lily started getting harder to make. She'd answer, then go quiet, then whisper that Grandma was in the doorway. One evening she got maybe 10 seconds out before the line cut, and when I called back, it went straight to voicemail. The next afternoon Lily managed a single text, typed in the slow, careful way of a kid who isn't sure she's allowed. They took my charger. I sat with my phone in my hand and made myself breathe. My mother had started working on Lily directly. I learned later, the way she works on everyone. Auntie Audrey is trying to break up our family. Auntie Audrey doesn't really want you. She just wants to win. If you go with her, you'll never see Grandma and Grandpa again, and won't that be sad? 8 years old, and they were teaching her to be afraid of the one adult fighting for her. Carol also called Patricia's office herself, sweet as pie, to say there had been a misunderstanding, and that of course she'd be happy to clear everything up. And by the way, they were considering a move closer to Roy's brother in another state, for Lily's stability. And wouldn't it be a shame to disrupt all this litigation? Patricia translated it for me in one sentence. She just told us she's a flight risk on a recorded line to a lawyer. I almost laughed. People who love control cannot help narrating their own plans. It's the same instinct that makes an embezzler keep the spreadsheet. I told Patricia we needed to move before the moving truck did. She was already drafting. That night I didn't sleep, and for once I didn't try to. We filed everything within 72 hours, and the petition did what petitions do when there's real concern attached. It triggered a welfare check from the county. I wasn't allowed to be there, which was its own kind of torture, sitting in a Patricia's waiting room while a stranger walked through that house. But the report, when it came, read like it had been copied off my own notes by someone who'd never met me. The caseworker documented the refrigerator, the same near-empty hum I'd stood in front of weeks before, except now it was official, photographed, dated, in a government file. The padlocked pantry. A child wearing clothes too small in a house with a new television and a patio set. And the detail that stopped even the caseworker cold, the one she wrote up in her own words. She'd found, in Lily's backpack and tucked under her mattress and in a coat pocket, small hidden stashes of food. Saltines, a granola bar, half a sandwich, wrapped and saved. A child who hoards food is a child who has learned, somewhere deep and early, that food is not guaranteed. You can argue about a lot of things in family court. You cannot argue with a kid's body keeping score. The caseworker's report didn't use the word my mother had used. It didn't say the child was fed and housed. It said the child showed signs of chronic neglect and food insecurity in a home with apparent discretionary income. Apparent discretionary income. The whole case. 4 cold words. I read the report twice and then I called Daniel, who was already on a flight east, and I told him it was real now, it was in the record, and that he should come straight to Hartsboro because his daughter was about to need her father in a courtroom. My mother does not lose quietly. The counterattack came fast and it was uglier than I'd braced for. She hired her own lawyer and rewrote the whole story in his language. I was the bitter, childless aunt who'd swooped in after years of absence to steal a grandchild out of spite. I'd never offered to help, they said, never sent a dime, never visited, until suddenly I wanted custody. Every one of those claims was the exact opposite of the truth, and that's what made them effective. A clean inversion is harder to fight than a simple lie. They told the relatives, the church, anyone who'd listen, that the government was being weaponized against 2 seniors who'd done nothing but love a child no one else wanted. And it worked. On some of them. Cousins stopped returning my calls. An old family friend sent me a message I won't repeat. The pressure was constant and it was designed to make me doubt myself, and there were nights it nearly did. But there was one crack in their wall, and her name was Sharon. My aunt called me, late, when she thought Carol was asleep. She didn't apologize, not really. She talked in circles about how Carol had always been the strong one, how she herself had just gone along, how she'd told herself the babysitting money she took was harmless. Then her voice dropped. That child does hide food, she said. I've seen it. I told myself it was a phase. A long pause. I don't sleep good lately, Audrey. I didn't comfort her. I'm not proud of how little I felt for her in that moment, but I noted, the way I note everything, that the chorus was starting to lose the tune, and that a frightened witness who can't sleep sometimes becomes an honest one. The next morning, I told Patricia every word of that call. Then we hit the wall I'd been warned about, and it knocked the wind out of me anyway. At the first hearing, a brief one just to set the schedule, the judge declined to remove Lily from the home before the full hearing. Courts favor the status quo, especially with grandparents, especially when the relatives raising a child have a year of stability to point at and a lawyer to point at it for them. Lily would stay where she was until the matter was fully heard, weeks away. Patricia had told me this might happen. Knowing it might happen did nothing to soften it. I drove the 2 hours back to Belhaven that night, and I'll admit I sat in my car in the dark driveway and put my forehead on the wheel. Weeks. Weeks of that refrigerator and that padlock and my mother whispering in my niece's ear. But I have learned, in 20 years of chasing money people swear isn't missing, that slower is not the same as losing. The numbers don't expire. A documented truth only gets stronger while a lie has to keep being maintained. So I made myself useful instead of frantic. I got a court order to set up brief, supervised phone calls with Lily, so they couldn't cut the line again. I checked in with the caseworker so the file stayed warm, and I told Lily, on one of those monitored calls, in the calmest voice I owned, that this was taking longer than I wanted, but that I was not going anywhere, that I'd be in that courtroom, and that the truth was on its way even when it felt slow. "Promise?" she said. "I don't make promises I can't keep." I made that one. Then I went home and built the exhibit that would keep it. Daniel landed and drove straight to me, and when he walked through my door I almost didn't recognize him, then absolutely did. Thinner, steadier, a year and a half of hard work and harder honesty in his face. He'd brought a folder of his own, because grief had made him careful too. He had 18 months of completion certificates from his program, pay stubs from the boat, and the thing that made my breath catch, records of money transfers home, monthly, to an account my parents controlled. Money he'd believed was feeding and clothing his daughter, stacked right on top of the survivor benefits they were already misusing. I want to be careful here, because his money isn't the heart of the case. The benefits are, the documented, public, legally owed to Lily benefits. But Daniel's transfers corroborated everything. They showed a father trying from 2,000 miles away, while the people in the house took from every hand that reached toward that child and gave her almost none of it. He sat at my kitchen table and read my ledger, and then the caseworker's report, and his hands shook. "I left her with them," he said. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought getting well was the right thing." I told him the truth, because he needed it more than comfort. Getting well was the right thing. Trusting them was the mistake, and it was a mistake any decent person makes about their own parents, because the alternative is unthinkable until it's sitting in front of you in a government file. "Will the judge let me have her?" he asked. I told him I didn't know. I told him what I did know, that he was going to stand up in that courtroom and tell the truth, and that the two of us together were a wall they could not talk their way through. The week before the full hearing, the bank records I'd only been able to guess at finally arrived, pried loose through the court once Patricia's petition was filed, and they confirmed my reconstruction down to the dollar. So I did what I do best, and I did it for the most important file of my life. I built the exhibit, not theater, architecture, a single timeline that a person with no accounting background could follow in 90 seconds. Money in, dated. Money out, dated. The cruise 4 days after a deposit. The casino withdrawals clustered at the first of each month, exactly where I'd told Patricia they'd be. The bare line where a child's needs should have been. Beside it, the school records, the medical gaps, the caseworker's photographs of that humming, near-empty refrigerator. And one more thing, the smallest and maybe the heaviest. From that first week, I'd flagged Lily's cracked pink flip phone as evidence and told Patricia to have it preserved before anyone thought to wipe it. Now, with the call logs formally in hand, I finally read the whole record it had been keeping. 14 calls. 14 times that child had tried to reach me or her father across those months, and the nights the calls didn't connect lined up to the day, with the periods her grandparents had her phone for charging. A phone they'd dismissed as a toy had been keeping the truth the whole time. I organized all of it into a binder, tabbed and indexed, and I made 3 copies. And the night before the hearing, I laid it on my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. There's a feeling you get sometimes when a case is finally whole, when every number has somewhere to be and nothing is left dangling. It isn't triumph. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling of a thing being true and being able, at last, to prove it. I closed the binder, set it by the door, and laid out my clothes for the morning like a soldier the night before. That same night, late, my supervised call with Lily came through, and her voice was smaller than usual. The hearing was the next morning, and somehow she knew the size of it. "Grandma says if the judge listens to you, I'll have to leave my room," she said. "She says you'll take me away from everybody." I closed my eyes. My mother was still working, right up to the buzzer, teaching a child to fear her own rescue. I kept my voice level, the way I had through this whole long thing, because Lily had had enough adults lose their composure at her. I told her nobody was going to make her disappear from anyone who truly loved her. I told her that tomorrow some grown-ups would talk for a while in a quiet room, and that her job was just to be 8 years old, and that mine was to make sure the truth got said out loud. "What if they don't believe you?" she asked. And there it was, the same fear I'd carried 2 hours up the highway on that first stormy night, handed back to me in a child's voice. I thought about the binder by my door, every page of it. "Lily," I said, "I brought receipts." She didn't understand the joke, but she heard the steadiness under it, and that was the point. "I'm alone, Auntie. I'm so hungry. Please come." She'd said that to me weeks ago, and I had come, and now I had to finish coming, all the way through a courtroom. "Go to sleep, sweetheart," I told her. "Tomorrow's the day the grown-ups finally listen." I hung up. I did not sleep. I was ready anyway. The Hartsboro County Family Courthouse is a plain brick building with bad lighting and worse coffee, and on the morning of the hearing, it held everyone who mattered in this story. My parents sat with their lawyer, a slick man in a gray suit. Sharon sat behind them. A few relatives filled the gallery, there to support the saints. Daniel sat beside me, in a borrowed jacket, gripping his folder. Patricia laid our binder on the table like it weighed nothing. My mother had dressed for the part, a soft cardigan, a little gold cross, the costume of a woman who only ever loved. Her lawyer opened exactly the way we'd expected. He spoke of 2 devoted seniors on a fixed income who'd taken in an orphaned grandchild when no one else would, of a son who abandoned his child, of an aunt who'd been absent for years and now, out of bitterness, sought to tear apart the only stable home this little girl had known. He said the word stability, the way a magician says a magic word, over and over, hoping repetition would do the work of proof. He gestured at Carol's cardigan and Roy's grave nod. He painted, in short, the picture they'd been painting for a year, and for a few minutes, in that fluorescent room, I watched the judge listen to it with a neutral face, and I felt the old fear rise. Then Patricia stood and said the truth was simpler than all of that, and asked to walk the court through the record. I had told Patricia I didn't need to make a speech. The whole strategy of my life is that the documents make the speech. So we put the exhibit on the screen, one clean page at a time, and I answered the judge's questions in the flat, specific voice I use with clients, no adjectives, just dates and dollars. Here is the survivor benefit, deposited the 3rd of each month. Here is the kinship stipend. Here is the cruise, balcony stateroom, 7 nights. Here is the date the deposit cleared, 4 days after a benefit payment. Here are the casino withdrawals, clustered at the 1st of every month. Here is the new television, the patio set, the salon, the catalog orders. And here, Your Honor, is the line for the child. Groceries, clothing, medical care. A coat that fits. I let the silence sit on how short that line was. Then the school records, the 11 absences, the free lunch list, the teacher's note, then the medical gaps, then the caseworker's photographs, the humming refrigerator with its carton of expired milk, and the inventory of food a frightened child had hidden around her own home. I held up the glossy cruise brochure, the one from the empty fruit bowl, and set it next to the bank statement so the sailing date and the deposit date sat side by side. I never raised my voice. I didn't have to. There is a particular quiet that comes over a room when a story everyone half believed meets a fact that can't be argued with. The judge looked at the brochure, looked at the photograph of the refrigerator, looked, for a long moment, at my mother in her soft cardigan. And my mother, who had been dabbing her eyes for the gallery, stopped dabbing. Patricia let the numbers breathe, and then she did the thing we'd planned, the only flourish in an otherwise bloodless case. She asked me, for the record, what my mother had said the night I found Lily alone, about the child's needs. I repeated it, word for word, in the same flat voice. She told me, Your Honor, that the child was fed and housed, and asked what more a child needs. Patricia let that hang. Then she gestured at the screen, at the 4 days after a deposit cruise, and the clustered casino withdrawals, and the photograph of an 8-year-old's hidden saltines, and she said, quietly, to the room, We now know precisely what Mrs. Nichols believed a child needs. The record shows what she spent the child's money on instead. The line landed the way a true thing lands. I watched it travel across the gallery. The cousin who'd touched my arm at the potluck and warned me not to wreck a happy home looked at the screen, then down at her own hands. The old family friend shifted in his seat. The story they'd all been fed for a year, the saints and the jealous aunt, dissolved in the time it takes to read a date off a bank statement. She's fed. She's housed. What more does a child need? My mother had built a whole defense on that sentence, and it had just become the most damning thing in the room. Across the aisle, I saw the exact moment Carol understood that her own words had turned on her. That was when she broke, and I want to describe it honestly, because for a year these people had owned the story of who was calm and who was unhinged, and the courtroom watched that story flip in real time. Carol started with tears, the practiced kind, pressing the little gold cross, telling the judge she'd given up her whole retirement for that child. When the judge's face didn't soften, the tears curdled into blame. Daniel dumped her on us, she said, voice climbing. He ran off and left us with a kid we never asked for, and now everyone wants to act like we're the criminals. Then the self-pity. Do you know what we sacrificed? Do you have any idea? And finally, when none of it caught, the anger, which had been there under everything the whole time. She turned on me from across the room. You ungrateful little thing, you were always like this, always thinking you were better than us. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm. She shook it off, and my father, who had said almost nothing, leaned forward and delivered the line he'd been delivering my whole life, the one he'd used in that cold kitchen weeks ago, certain it still had power. You left this family, Roy said. You don't get a vote. The judge, who had been patient, set down her pen. Mr. Nichols, she said, with the flat authority of someone who has heard every version of this, in this courtroom, the vote is mine, and I've seen the record. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. For the first time in 34 years, my father's certainty had run into something harder than itself, and the whole room heard it crack. Then it was Daniel's turn, and my brother stood up in his borrowed jacket and did the bravest thing I've ever watched him do. He didn't perform. He just told the truth in order. He told the court about Ruth, and the months he couldn't get out of bed, and the program he checked himself into so he wouldn't become a danger to the one person he had left. He told them about the boat, the 18 months, the money he'd wired home every single month believing it was feeding his daughter. He told them how the house phone stopped connecting his calls, how he'd been told Lily was thriving and that calling too often would only confuse her. I trusted my parents with my little girl, he said, and his voice didn't break this time, it just got very quiet. They used that. They used me. They used the checks with her name on them. His lawyer entered his transfer records, the completion certificates, the pay stubs, all of it lining up beside my ledger like a second witness saying the same thing. And then, Patricia called the witness the other side never saw coming. After that sleepless late-night call, Sharon had reached out to my lawyer's office on her own, and her name had quietly gone onto our witness list. The judge had her sworn in. Carol hissed her sister's name. Sharon ignored her. Hands shaking, she told the court she had to say something because she couldn't sleep anymore. She told them about the babysitting money she'd taken, the conversations she'd overheard, the food she'd watched that child hide. I told myself it wasn't my business, she said. It was my business. She's 8. It didn't make Sharon a hero. She'd looked away for 2 years for a cut of the money, and a few honest minutes in a courtroom doesn't erase that. But it broke the last load-bearing wall in my mother's house of stories, and it broke it with the truth. The judge took a recess, and the longest 20 minutes of my life passed in a beige hallway with Daniel pacing and me sitting very still. When she came back, she spoke plainly, and I'll give it to you the way she gave it to us. The evidence of neglect and of the misuse of Lily's benefits was, in her words, substantial and well documented. She was removing Lily from her grandparents' guardianship that day. She was awarding custody to Daniel, her father, with a structured transition plan, supervised at first, stepping up as he proved the stability he was already, frankly, proving. And she named me as the standing support and temporary co-guardian to anchor the handoff. So Lily would never again be one closed door away from family. As for the money, the judge was careful, the way the law is careful. The question of the misused benefits, she said, would be referred to the appropriate agency for review, which could require my parents to repay what they'd taken and could open further proceedings. She did not promise prison. I had never wanted prison. I watched my mother's face as she realized she would have to give back, in dollars, what she'd told herself she deserved, and that the comfortable story of the sacrificing grandmother was now a government file with her name on it. It wasn't ruin. They'd keep their house. They'd keep each other. They would not, the judge made clear, keep that child or that child's money. And across the room, a little girl who'd whispered into a cracked phone on a stormy night was told, in the gentlest voice that hard woman owned, that she was going home with her dad. The first night, Daniel and Lily and I ate dinner at my kitchen table in Bellhaven, a real one, roast chicken and too many vegetables and a store cake with no occasion except that we could. Lily ate like she still wasn't sure it would last, and then, slowly, like she was starting to believe it might. She wore a coat that fit, hung by my door where she could see it. The cracked pink flip phone sat in her pocket out of habit, though she didn't need to whisper into it anymore. The next week we got her a real phone, with her dad's number and mine and nothing to hide. My parents kept their house and their version of events for the relatives who still wanted it, which was fewer than before. The agency review went forward. Last I heard, they'd been told to repay what they'd taken, on a schedule that would follow them a long while. I take no pleasure in that part. Or not much. They were not monsters in a story. They were two people who decided a child's needs were smaller than their own comfort, and who told themselves a warm lie until a cold ledger made it impossible. If there's a moral I'd carve over the door of that courthouse, it's a simple one, and I learned it from an 8-year-old with a prepaid phone. Daniel found work near me, and an apartment 2 blocks from mine, close enough that Lily can walk to my place after school, and does, most days, dropping her backpack and raiding a refrigerator I keep deliberately, gloriously full. She doesn't hide food anymore. It took months. It took a counselor and a lot of ordinary dinners, but the hiding stopped. Sharon wrote me a letter once, 3 pages, mostly about herself. I read it and didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away either. She told the truth when it counted, late and for the wrong reasons and after years of looking away, and I've decided that's a real thing even when it isn't a clean thing. We don't see my parents. Maybe someday, supervised, if Lily ever wants to. That'll be her call, when she's grown. Some doors you leave shut, and some you just leave for the child to open later. Blood made us relatives. It was showing up in a storm, building the truth one line at a time, and refusing to look away that made us a family. That's my story. One frightened call, 2 hours of rain, and a folder of facts that spoke louder than any shouting match ever could. If this reminded you that quiet courage and a clear record can protect a child when good intentions can't, take it as your sign to check on the kid nobody else is checking on. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.